One of the great things about Sartre was that although in some ways he's quite a technical philosopher, he lighted on incredibly powerful and resonant topics, which is exactly what he does in the Sketch for a Theory of Emotions. Emotions is it's definitely, for one thing, it's an everyday concept, it's an everyday word, it's in everybody's vocabulary, and I think the way Sartre was using it in the 1930s is much the same way that we use it almost 100 years later. And he discovers that this apparently simple word actually covers up a multitude of confusions, or at least that's his argument. And first of all, the word, I suppose we use it to mean some kind of heightened experience. There's a couple of sort of classic instances. There's Edward Gibbon, his first visit to Rome, he says, I can neither forget nor express the strong emotion which agitated my mind as I first entered the eternal city. And then these famous remarks of William Wordsworth about poetry as the overflow of powerful feelings and emotion recollected in tranquility. So the clue is there that emotion is, the word emotion is not just a descriptive term, it's a sort of normative term too. It means something that is agitating you, that's disturbing, you might say, your normal balance of mind. It's disturbing your normal cognitive functioning. And you might say that emotion is when we're overwhelmed by, outrageous fortune. Something happens to us and we're suddenly overwhelmed by emotion. And Sartre's argument is, no, that is not it at all. We're not victims of our emotions. We're responsible for them.
Right.
We all of us, as human beings, we have our hopes and fears and our projects, our plans for action. And the world as it presents itself to us is not just a kind of neutral field. It's a set of opportunities to get what we want, and obstacles in the face of our efforts. And Sartre's idea of emotions is that there's something that we do, they're kind of actions that we take when our plans are thwarted. So it all starts with us, our plans, our attitudes, our interpretations. He has an example of a patient talking to a psychiatrist, and they get close to a sensitive topic, and the patient breaks down into uncontrollable sobbing. And you might say, oh, well, the poor patient was overwhelmed and couldn't continue. Sartre says, no, the patient chose not to continue, and the way the patient chose not to continue was by choosing to sob instead of to talk. Of course, that's not how it feels to the patient. I mean, that's the whole point of this kind of activity, is you tell yourself that you're not responsible for it. But Sartre is saying, actually, you are. An emotion is a goal-directed attempt to transform the world, or at least to protest at the state of the world. So emotions are, you might think they're passions, they're not, they're actions.
Yes. And he does say about that example, he says that's something new in thought. That's something new in psychological thought, the idea that you would be sobbing in order not to have to describe your own troubles. And that leads him, as of course it must lead anyone, to Freudianism and to the idea of the unconscious. And here there's an interesting turn, because you expect, if you knew nothing about Sartre at all, you would expect this particular writer, writing in 1939, who seems to be really, really interested in the idea of the unconscious, precisely interested in emotion as blockage, and the path that you're forced, I just used a leading word, forced, I guess, if you believe in the unconscious, to take because of that blockage. If you didn't know anything about Sartre and his thinking, and it was just any old writer, you'd say, okay, this is the moment at which our psychologist is going to embrace the unconscious. And it's very interesting, because that's the moment where Sartre does the exact opposite. He looks at the unconscious, and in a way that's very consistent with as far as I can tell, all his work in the 30s and on into the 1940s, including Being and Nothingness, he rejects the idea of the unconscious. He gives credit to psychoanalysis as a theory that interested in the signification of emotion, the meaning of emotion. But he is very suspicious of the idea of the unconscious because he feels that it sets up a kind of second mind that exists somehow outside or behind or underneath consciousness, directing it. And that is an intolerable notion to Sartre. He does not believe that. The consciousness is, I guess, consciousness is holds everything that, well, it doesn't hold because it's not a holder, but consciousness comprehends everything that goes within itself, and therefore it seems, I think, illogical for Sartre to talk about unconscious motivations. They're all part of the structuration of consciousness itself. I'm interested. I'm not convinced, I have to say, by his rejection of the unconscious, and I'm tempted in a psychoanalytic way to do a bit of analysis on Sartre himself and what's at stake for him in the idea of not believing in the unconscious. But I think it's a very interesting moment there where he's clearly overwhelmingly interested in what you and I might call the unconscious, only to reject it in favor of something else. What is that something else that he puts in place of a Freudian idea of the unconscious, would you say?
It's very difficult to get your head around Sartre's attitude to Freud. I think one thing to say about Sartre is that he was not a very careful reader. He wrote at incredible speed, or at least he could write at incredible speed, and he obviously read at incredible speed too. And I think a lot of people would say that actually he agrees with Freud much more than he suspects. There were one or two essays, the so-called metapsychological essays, where Freud gave a very sort of mechanical, hydraulic idea of how the unconscious was supposed to work, how the different parts of the mind were supposed to work. And Sartre objected to those because it made it sound as though the mind was not systematic. It wasn't, and also that the mind consisted of kind of inert forces rather than meanings that required interpretation. And I think that subsequent Freudians called themselves Freudian, although they had taken on Sartre's criticisms of Freud. So I think it's very difficult to say pro-Freud or anti-Freud. But there was one thing I wanted to pick up, James. You talked about consciousness as Sartre understands it containing all these things. And I understood what you meant, but I also think that Sartre would say, no, the whole point about consciousness is that it doesn't contain anything.
Right.
And he's very explicit about this in the essay on the emotions, because he begins by making a distinction, or by drawing attention to a distinction, which he says is fundamental both to empirical psychology and to psychoanalysis and to common sense, which is the distinction between experience of the external world on the one hand, and then inner experience, or expérience réflexive, reflective experience. And Sartre says, well, that's the common assumption is that experience begins with inner experience, our experience of ourselves, and then we build up from that to create a sense of a world external to ourselves, external to us in space and time. And Sartre says, no, that's not at all it. Reflexive knowledge, any knowledge we have of ourselves, is secondary. Basic experience is experience of the world, and reflexive experience comes second. And that's why we are sort of built so as to, first of all, have emotions, or rather do emotions, but also built so as to understand, so as to misunderstand, systematically misunderstand what we're doing when we're being emotional. And we think that being afraid or angry or crazily cheerful is a fact about us rather than a fact about the world. And Sartre says, well, you need to rethink your very concept of the world. When we want to know how things are going for someone, we tend to ask them how they're feeling. And psychologists urge people to get in touch with their inner feelings, or to talk about them, or to be mindful of them. And and journalists, if people are involved in a disaster of some kind, or a wonderful event, or that site as one, journalists will go and interview people and say, how do you feel? And I think from Sartre's point of view, don't ask people how they feel. Ask them how they think about the world. If someone's afraid, it's because the world is frightening for them. If they're angry, it's because it's infuriating. And if they're cheerful, it's because, as far as they're concerned, all's well with the world. So don't ask about the inner life. There's no such thing. Just ask about the person, the world as your interlocutor is conscious of it. So no inner life at all, in a way, or at least inner life only as a kind of secondary formation. The basic situation is that our consciousness is empty, but it's open towards the world.
Thanks for listening to this extract from Close Readings. You can listen to the full episode and all our other Close Readings series by signing up to our Close Readings subscription. Go to lrb.me/audio or click on the link in the description.